Good evening, everyone. It is your girl, Marcy Thomas. I am super excited to be here with you again for another episode of the BGC Book Club. You know, this is a space where, as the introduction said, we believe in celebrating books that are by, for, and about us. And tonight is no exception. So whether it's your first time joining us or you've been here before, come on in the room, as our girl Tabitha Brown would say, and get ready for what's going to be a wonderful conversation about a real life historical woman, a book that's centered around her life. So if you don't mind dropping in the comments where you're joining us from, I am coming to you from the outskirts of Atlanta, GA. And our guest tonight actually lives in an area that I used to live in. So I don't know if I've ever told her that or not. So I'm ready to get into it. So our special guest for this evening is Denny S. Bryce, who is the award-winning author of historical fiction novels, Wild Women and the Blues, In the Face of the Sun, and the one that I'm calling it award-winning even before we get started. Her new one is The Other Princess, a novel of Queen Victoria's goddaughter based on the life of Sarah Forbes Bonetta. Now, Denny herself is a former professional dancer and public relations professional. She is also an adjunct professor at the MFA program at Drexel University, a book critic for NPR, and a freelance writer whose work has been published in USA Today, Harper's Bazaar, and Frolic Media. She is a member of the Historical Novel Society, Women Fiction Writers Association, and Tall Poppy Writers. Originally from Chi-Town, which I've lived there too, believe it or not, she is currently residing in Savannah, Georgia. So without further delay, let's welcome Denny S. Bryce to the BGC Book Club. Yay!
Hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing good and happy to have you here. Margaret had a comment before we even went live saying she's excited to hear you talk about this one. So
Okay,
that's
I'm excited
exciting.
to talk about it because, as I mentioned, I had traveled and done some things a couple of weeks ago. So during my launch week, I was sick, and my voice is a little light for me. Usually, I have a little bit more power behind my my residence in here, but I had COVID last week, and so, but I'm better. I'm better
Yes.
over it, but just recovery. So if my voice is a little soft, forgive me, but I'm excited to talk about this book. So I'm
Oh,
gonna
yes.
have
And
all the
we're
energy
excited
I
to
can
get
find.
into it.
Mhm.
Definitely excited to get into it. So now, of course, this is your third historical novel with some
Yeah.
others coming down the pike next year we can talk about later on.
Okay.
So
Okay.
what was it specifically that drew you to want to write about Sarah Forbes Bonetta?
Well, I'm going to tell you that it was an interesting journey to get to this novel because I remember in 2016, I watched Victoria um,
Mhm.
on PBS or something like that. It was a series, it was really a good one. And I remember this moment where they had the young African girl in an episode that Queen Victoria had some sort of whatever with. And I didn't pay a lot of attention to it.
Mhm.
Um, I kind of just touched it and left. Then a few years later, there was a Tessa Woodward, who is the editorial director at William Morrow, put out a tweet that said, back when it was still Twitter, um,
Mhm.
and put out a tweet that said, "How come nobody's written about Sarah Forbes Bonetta?" Well, I was like, "Oh, wow, I should
Mhm.
look her up."
Right.
Then a friend of mine, an author that many people know, who is a fabulous supporter of authors with her own fabulous record of fabulous books, and that's Vanessa Riley.
Oh, yes.
She said, "Girl, you need to put something together."
Mhm.
And so she encouraged me, and I put together a pitch and sent it to Tessa, and she was like, "Let's talk." And the next thing you knew, I had a contract.
All right.
So, so it was, and that was in 2019.
Mhm.
So the book is now coming out in 23. I had some other obligations in terms of stories.
Right. Right.
Also adjusting I think I signed this contract. I know I signed this contract before Wild Women in the Blues even came out.
Okay.
It was a sort of like a series of things that happened that let me know that if I was going to write full time, I had a lot of writing I had to do, and under contract is a different type of writing than when you're sitting there saying, "I'm trying to get that first book done," so that you
Right.
send it off through your agent on submission. So it was an exciting time, but it was also one of the reasons why I've been bent over a computer for the last 2 years.
Right.
Because it's one of several books that I just finished my 5th book, but we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, we will definitely talk about that. And real quick, before we really get into her story, I do want to share the picture that I have of her. So we know we are talking about a real person. She's covering our faces a little bit, but yeah, that is her. That is lead
Sarah Forbes Bonetta, also
Yeah.
known as Princess Aina, A-I-N-A is how it's spelled. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it correctly. I have to listen to my narrator on my audiobook because I'm sure she pronounces it properly.
I believe that I did listen to the audio, so I do believe that that's what she said.
Yeah.
So,
so ask away so I can talk about this.
So for those who might not be familiar with the story at all, just we'll get into some of the specific things that you talk about in the book, but just in like general terms, what is her story about?
Sarah Forbes Bonetta, or Princess Aina, was a young girl, 5 years old, African princess in what is now Nigeria, a part of I cannot pronounce words right now, excuse my throat, but she was in West Africa, and her village was attacked by the Dahomey, and her family was murdered, and she was enslaved by King Gizo, who was the king of the Dahomey at the time. And she was in that enslavement camp for a couple of years prior to being rescued by Lieutenant Commander Frederick E. Forbes. I think his middle initial is E, because there's an E. There's so many Fredericks.
Right.
I had E and F and all of this sort of stuff. So I believe that's his middle initial. Well, that commander, who was a British officer, had been instructed by Queen Victoria and the Royal Navy to communicate on a regular basis throughout Africa with the different tribal leaders. Because in 1834, that this is all happening in 1840s. But in 1834, the British were the first. Well, they ended slavery. They ended being able to sell and buy slaves at that time, but they didn't stop people who were already involved in that particular type of activity. So his job was to go and just try and encourage these different tribal leaders who were still practicing, selling people as property and merchandise, to stop doing it. So with this one, with King Gizo, that was not something he was interested in at the time. He did some different things. Nonetheless, Sarah Forbes Bonetta, or Princess Aina, was gifted to Queen Victoria. He saved her, rescued her from one of the activities that King Gizo had, which was to celebrate his wealth by killing a certain number of slaves, of his enslaved peoples, because he would go to different. I mean, there's a whole history with him, and it's complicated, and frightening and interesting history that more and more people should know about. Some of the people who watched The Woman King, uh,
Yes.
Viola Davis, might have been introduced to King Gizo at a younger time. This is later.
Okay.
My story takes place later in his reign, if you will. But nonetheless, this young girl ends up in England in Queen Victoria's court, and she lives in different places that the queen arranges for her to live. She didn't live in any of the castles. She visited frequently, but she also had a tug of, I guess, location. She would think she was going to be one place for a long period of time, and she ended up being sent back to Africa. And then after being in Africa for a while, she got sent back to England. So she was always in transit. And after
Right.
the trauma of her losing her family and the years she stayed enslaved, it was just a very traumatic youth. But she was resilient. She
Mhm.
was very, very smart. She was a linguist. She could speak and write many. She learned writing. She learned music. She was a singer. Just so much talent and energy for the arts, in
Right.
addition to um, what she was exposed to as part, she played with the royal children, et cetera, et cetera. So, and the thing that is even more amazing to me as a writer and a researcher is that I found so much documentation of her
Hmm.
life. A novel by Walter Myers. Let me see if I wanted to, because me and names
Mhm.
sometimes uh, goes by the wayside, and you can't see my screen. Yay! But I have the book right here. I can just look in my author notes and tell you as well. But there were, um, I'm just scrolling here. Let me close this out. But there was a book called At Her Majesty's Request that was a
Mm.
children's book written in 1999 by Walter
Okay.
Myers, Myers, I believe is how you spell his last name. And what I found intriguing about he had a lot of letters
Mm.
and diary entries and things of that nature, but he was a well known um, old bookstore kind of guy.
Gotcha.
And a London bookshop is what I read. Found her letters and
Mhm.
called him. He said, we think we have something you would love. And he's African American man from the US. He travels over and grabs these letters. And he was the first one I feel strongly that really got to explore and research and tell a very vivid nonfiction book, is a children's book, but so it had
Okay.
that tone to it, but nonetheless it was had a lot of good facts. And then there was another gentleman who I also got a lot of information from, who was a doctor who in his later years decided he wanted to be a historian. Um,
Mm. Okay.
sort of a more sort of a, I should say, he was a big fan of history, and he wrote a book about a man named um, Davies, Captain Davies, and that book had a lot of content as well about Sarah Forbes Bonetta. Um, Newspaper articles, the whole research process
Mhm.
to see facts and her words
Wow.
written, in documents, and then this, that, and the other, letters that even her daughter, one of her daughters, wrote letters that I was able to, find in my wild and crazy search for information about her life and how she handled different things. And there was a lot of records, even in Mr. Myers' book, that had uh, they had essentially an accountant, or a
Mm.
royal accountant who kept track of all of the expenditures
Oh,
that
wow.
Queen, the royal household spent on Sarah Forbes Bonetta. And so you had everything when she went to school, when she went back to school in, I think she was in Freetown, when she went to the female institution there. She had, there was laundry list of her books, her clothes, her this and that, just all of this information and how much money was spent. There was records like that. So
Wow.
it was a joy to research. Well, I'm sort of obsessed with
Research, yes.
research, and I managed not to go down too many rabbit holes, because anyone who's a writer knows that, you know, you get into the research and the next thing you know, boom, you're just digging for something that you're never going to use in the story. But I managed to not get too lost in the weeds.
Well, that's good. That's good. And thank you for giving us a little insight into what that process is, because when you are writing about a person who was a real person, you know, the more information that you can actually gather about them is better. Because I know one of the questions that has come up before, because we do a lot of historical fiction in this
Yeah,
space, but you know, but it's how can you know, how do you tell those stories and still have a level of truth? So in your case, you were blessed that, you know, all of it didn't have to be, of course, you know, you don't know about individual conversations and things like that
absolutely. Yeah,
necessarily,
know that.
but you were able to glean enough just from the resources that were available to learn more about her life. So I want to start, or dive back into one of the first things that comes up, and that is her name. That happens like in the first, you know,
Mhm.
first section of the book, how she's born. And you know, if anybody's ever seen Roots, we know that there's a whole thing about naming a child, and you know,
Yes.
many African traditions, it
Mhm.
is a child's name is either a characteristic of the child, it could be the day that they're born, you know, all of these sorts of things. So I found, just even in the beginning of her life,
Yes. Yes.
that her mother was like grappling with, should I name her based upon the circumstances
The
of her
tradition.
birth and
Yeah,
tradition, or should I do something different? And
right.
and then, well, I'll let you talk about that. She made a certain
She
decision.
made a decision. Now, also, that story, this is what, I like. It's fiction. The
Right.
book is fiction, but there are established benchmarks that, an author used that has to be in place. So I felt strongly that as a mother, she knew what her name meant, or
Mhm.
what her name could mean to her life, her destiny, because
Right.
there was that involved in it. And I will share that her name, um, Anya, means born with an umbilical cord around your neck.
Mhm.
And so that carries with it some other things that are quickly addressed in the opening of the book. And so this is a mother who has had other children, and she's looking at this child and saying, do I want to put a burden on
Mm.
this child that I already had it was a hard birth. It's, to have a child that way in that time period, because who knows how
Right.
how things happened back then. There were no anesthetics or, you know, anything. Um, so I really felt that the facts of information allowed me to create that moment. And I
Mhm.
was very, it's, I don't often say this about writing, but I really felt in a zone, in a
Mhm.
place where
Mhm.
I um, heard, I understood their voices,
Mhm.
and especially Sarah's voice just
Mhm.
was so clear to me as I was writing her, and that was a fun, different experience. Now I'm only like 3 books into my professional writing career of fiction, historical fiction. Nonetheless, I want to have that experience over and over again, because you gather the facts, but then you have to have a character, and a
Right.
character with an arc, a character who hopefully your readers will connect with, your modern readers will connect with, and have some empathy and curiosity about what choices she's going to make as her journey through her life continues.
Right. And the reason why I brought that up is because of the fact that you do see certain things that play out in her life that have to
Mhm.
do with that, even later on when the name gets changed to Sarah. Who she was from the beginning of her journey is always going to be a part of her.
Mhm.
I guess that brings up the whole thing of nature versus nurture, or whatever the case
Right,
may
right.
be. But just even early on, she has a family, she has her siblings, her parents, and all of that. And then, she gets captured and ultimately ends up on a boat where people kind of take her in and
Yeah,
look out for her and, protect her because she is, quote unquote, the queen's gift. So they couldn't just treat her
you
in a way,
can't treat her just any old way.
just can't treat her any old kind of way. So I
Yeah.
found that very interesting to read or listen to
Mhm.
as well, because we always hear the narratives of and not to say that nothing was bad, just the fact of having lost your family and being separated from them and all that. Of course, that would be bad. But her experience was very different from what you think of when you think of an enslaved person.
Right, right, because once she is rescued, and I always put that in quotes too, um, once she is rescued, her life she has as a character, she had hope. She had hope that well, first she was relieved that she wasn't gonna get killed, but she had hope that maybe something would happen positive, and it took her a while. It took that whole boat ride, and that boat ride still had some trauma, so she
Mhm.
sort of, you know, she was taking it slow. She was taking her emotional commitment to others was not something that this particular character was, going trust was a big thing.
Right,
Trust that they were gonna not disappear on her or
right,
harm her emotionally, um,
right,
or what have you. So it's at the same time that we're talking about all of this hardship, I also wanted to um, share some of the lighter things. She's a
right.
child.
Yes.
Children are so resilient
Mhm.
to whatever is thrown at them, and that is also something that I felt she experienced, and I tried hard to put on the page, and I think I accomplished that, especially with her friendship with Monif, um,
Mm.
and then her friendships through her all through her life. When she found somebody that was a buddy, she was like, okay, she still had her ways.
Right,
She
right,
had her ways, but she had her buddies too, and those buddies and helped her as much as she would allow them to, and
right.
that was okay. Yeah. So there's even some lighter moments in this story.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And the fact that, as you said, she's a child. I mean, she's like 5, 6 years old when she gets captured. So we're not talking about an adult person going through
Right.
these experiences. We're talking about a little girl basically
Mhm.
going through these experiences.
And part of the thing that I did in writing her voice in that period, I got some inspiration from To Kill a Mockingbird, for example,
Okay, yes,
because you have a main character who's a child, but the voice is an adult looking back
mhm,
on those years, on
mm,
those experiences and those situations. So you get the voice of the child in the dialogue and narrative, but in the exposition, you really know that you're being told a story by a
right,
adult. So that is something that I try to structurally, in terms of storytelling, have my as the story goes on, you learn that she's talking to someone.
Right, right. And she's sharing her story.
Yes.
So in that story, of course, she has this boat trip that she finally makes it to England. And as you said, she's learning all these languages, because think like 5, 6 years old, she would have had the language that she grew up with in her home with her family and her parents. Then
Right.
she's learning languages, on the boat. She's having to, because she's going to have to be prepared to be in England, and to be, the queen's gift or goddaughter, whatever, however you want to position that. So
Right.
she's having to learn and take in a whole lot of information.
Mm-hmm.
She's on solid ground, so to speak. Then she begins to pick up music and all of these things.
Well, it was part of the royal household at the time. You have Queen Victoria, who was an accomplished pianist, and her husband, Prince Albert, also. They were both into music, and they were into entertainment, drama. I mean, they're sitting around running. Well, I think back then there were Parliament and
Right.
all of that stuff is going on, but there was an attention to the arts. There was an attention to those activities, and part of Sarah's if you will, is that she was someone who absorbed those things, not just languages, piano. She really ended up being, over time, an accomplished pianist, as well as a singer, and all of these things she shared or used to impress the queen, because she picked up on the fact that the queen wanted to check in on her. And the other resource that I used sparingly, however, because of, I just didn't want to get too deep into Queen Victoria's actual words. She has, it's posted online, millions of words. Her diaries are very, very intense. Now, her youngest daughter, I think Princess Beatrice, if I recall correctly, after her death, went through her diaries and adjusted them so that they would be of public consumption.
Gotcha.
So just tidbits like that. I mean, history is surprising.
It is. It is
surprising, scary sometimes, but also surprising.
Right. It definitely is, and obviously people have always been trying to switch it around or change it.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
Revisionist history, as I like to call it. So it's no different in this case.
So much of that. So much of that. And that's another thing where, as a writer of historical fiction, biographical historical fiction, fantasy, or historical fiction, I look at these, all of this material that I've gathered, and part of what I'm going to do is look at it and say, I wonder how much of this is actually what happened. Who wrote it? Who was that person who wrote it? What was their mindset? What were their politics? What was this, that, and the other? So that you don't just swallow the information as fact whole. You do some analysis of the information based on what we know about things such as racism, identity, colonialism, and also just women, the power or lack of power of women, color or, not. It's a lot of layers. Men wrote history for a long time.
Right, right. So you are so right about that, because those are a couple of things, and here we see, an inherent racism that may have existed in the midst of everything that was going on. As much as Sarah was being helped, there are times where, the racial dynamics do play out in different pieces of the story, as well as even with her in certain situations where you see the class show up, because she is, part of the royal family by extension.
Right,
And so there's
exactly.
a certain way that she lives and a certain things that she becomes accustomed to and a certain way that she dresses, like you can see
Mhm.
here. I know you talked about on the cover of the book, you were very intentional about making sure that she was dressed and her clothes fit her. And, she
Yes,
was
yes.
wearing the style of the time because that's what it would
It was
have been.
glamorous because, there's a whole letter that,
Mm,
I read where she's talking about, her clothes for an event, and she's like, "I have to have this, send me this." Sends a letter to, someone and essentially is saying, "I want these things here by before tomorrow morning, before the queen sees me, because I will not walk into this situation." She's giving orders,
mhm,
because
mhm.
her stature is important. She
Mm,
understands as her presentation must be a certain way. At the
right,
same time, she has, from her youth, I put in a early, bit in the story about how she's treated by her siblings, and
right,
that's an important, um, thing because she was special. She was the
right,
special, and so she was very conscious of being out in front of people and um, not being treated different. She didn't like being treated differently,
right.
in certain situations. So it was fun. It was fun creating this world that Sarah Forbes Bonetta was in based on the benchmarks, the facts of the time,
Right.
colonialism being huge, the role of the church missionary school, British, um, church, et cetera, very much a part of their relationship, Britain's relationship with Africa.
Right, right. And I'm glad you brought that up because that is a big part of it. Because a lot of times when everyone who was in Africa at the time was not necessarily Christian. They came from, traditional religions or Muslims or, other things of that nature. But the whole part of the colonization was to bring Christianity
Mm,
to Africans. So, of course, that was one of the things that they wanted. That is what they wanted for Sarah as well, whether she wanted that or not.
right,
And that was
right.
one of the things that was also very interesting to me is that, of course, because the queen, she was pretty much the property, for lack of a better way of putting it,
Mhm,
of
mhm.
the royal family. She had to do what they
What
wanted her to do
exactly.
versus being able to really have freedom of choice, even with all of the quote unquote good things that are happening for her, she still
Mhm.
had to follow certain guidelines.
That's absolutely true, and that was, again, evident at a certain juncture in the book that is
Right.
based on total benchmarking facts, and, she makes a choice that is, stunningly surprising for,
Mhm.
a young woman, um, she defies something the queen wants, and she stands up and says, "No."
Not gonna not gonna do that.
No.
But even before that, I wanted to bring up Sierra Leone for a couple of reasons because that's where my mother's ancestry line goes back to Sierra Leone, number one. So anytime I
Okay.
see it in a book, it always like, oh, Sierra Leone, but also Freetown and what was happening there. And it was I've heard of it, but in your book, just to see how you really described how Sarah wound up there and some of the things that were actually happening in Freetown and kind of what that town in Sierra Leone was all about. So if you could just give us a little bit about that for those who may not even know what that is.
Freetown was has a lengthy history that I don't dive into a lot, but um, the different the name gives away a
Right.
little bit of what happened. There were the enslaved who escaped from mostly Brazil
Mm,
and the shore, some from the Americas, from America, if you will, but they got to this town and formed a community, an entire way of life. I think they were called Saros, Saro. I'm not sure, but it was a world that was created by former slaves, but then they also got involved in business. They got involved in trade. They got involved in building a community that had some um, influence, some hands on colonialism going on. But what was really important to this world there was the idea of education. That
Mhm.
was another big element of the growth and sort of the establishment of Freetown as more than just it was a community, but it was also a movement in a
Mhm.
way during that time period. And it um, one of the main characters, Captain Davies, his family, his parents were one of the first
Mhm.
people in Freetown, and he was in the British Navy. He was an African man. He was in the British Navy. He was a merchant. He was
Mhm.
incredibly wealthy, and he was a part of this what they called the African elite in
Mhm.
places like Freetown, places like the Lagos colony, etc. He traveled back and forth between London, doing and I mean Britain and and Africa on a regular basis because he was a major player in business.
Mhm. Yes, and I just thought it was interesting to see that. And then, of course, Sarah's time there, early on as a student,
Hmm.
even though based upon some of her trauma and other things she went through, she was reluctant to even want to go back into Africa, which you all have to read the book to get all the
Yeah, to
background.
all the story happening.
All of the story, but there was, even though she was African, there was a reluctance to even want to go there. But her being the woman or young lady that she was, she met people, she made friends. There were positive things that happened, even though she didn't necessarily want to be there. And then, to speak to your point a few moments ago about her rebellion, one of the other things I also found kind of interesting is that, of course, the young princesses and royals, and I think a lot of people in general at that time in history was a lot of arranged marriages,
Oh
arranged
yeah, yeah,
relationships, and with
yeah.
her being this young Black girl who is living differently, her options or choices weren't necessarily the same as it would have been for others who are in her same stage of life.
Right. Well, especially with the Queen. Queen
Right.
Victoria, I mean, she had a track record of arranged marriages for her children. For she was an arranged marriage. I mean, that was just part of the culture for, um, you know, that royal family hereditary or whatever it is. But so yeah, there was the normal stuff that you when you go back in time, the limitations of a woman's ability. There was no such thing as a at least in the royal court of a woman being independent.
Right.
You couldn't just go out and get a job and make money. Um,
Mhm.
Unless, there are different there's a whole bunch of other things that happened during that time, that, um, just didn't apply to
Right.
Sarah Forbes Bonetta. But, mostly in her situation, after she became an extended part of the royal household, was that she was someone who was going to the balls, was going to the different, um, activities and visible. The newspapers talked about her. She
Mhm.
got a formal invitation to the Princess Royal. That's the oldest daughter, Victoria's wedding that was printed in all of the newspapers
Mhm.
at the time, because they were just stunned. Oh, the queen sent her an invitation. She really is a part of the house. That sort of thing.
Right.
The thing happened. It's just it's an incredibly interesting differences in how not only how women, because her friendship with Princess Alice, who was her same age,
Mhm.
choice in marriage. You just didn't worry about that because your mother was going to take care of it.
Right.
So, you just did what you were told. Um, and some of that was part of the friction for Sarah.
Right, right. I mean, just the whole fact that, marriage was a business transaction.
Mhm.
Like we hear about dowries and all these sorts of things that,
Right.
occurred, and in some cultures it probably still exists.
I'm
But
sure.
yeah, in some
Yeah.
cultures it probably is still that way.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
But at that time, it was a big deal. And to think that, this young Black girl, and, I'll show her picture again. If you look at her, she is obviously Black. She is not, she is not of mixed heritage or anything like that, where you could be confused as to who and what she is.
Right.
And then, of course, we also at that time would have dealt with, okay, yes, she's of a certain status or stature, but you're not going to pair her with one of the white royals or men of society, because that's a whole nother
That's a
thing.
whole other thing. But she was traveling in the circles that, I don't want to give away stuff.
Right, we're not going to give away anything.
Yeah, yeah, but, read the book. She has
Yeah.
some interesting, interactions and opportunities that aren't as clear cut as you might think they should have been,
Hmm.
and she makes a choice that is based on emotions, um,
Hmm.
that, she risks quite a bit at one juncture,
Right.
and that's, what one of the things that really brought her to life for me as a
Hmm.
writer was knowing that she was not just stubborn, she had conviction
Hmm.
over herself, and that was just amazing to me. And I said, well, I know what she'd do here. I know what she'd
Right.
say there, So I got, I was like, woo, it's coming to me.
Right, right. And you did, the book is wonderful, is wonderfully written. There, are some other things, like well, there's like a piece of her history that she's carrying, and then she's not, and then she is. So y'all have to read it to figure out what that
Yeah,
is.
symbol.
You need
It's
to get,
symbolic. It's very, yeah, yeah. I was writing
yeah,
some questions for book clubs today, and I thought about that symbol that you're mentioning, and how it was important. The way it keeps its pacing in the story. It has
mhm,
this distinct role, and it was fun. It was fun to do that.
right.
It was, some of the things as a writer, sitting back and working on all of these stories, um, and having um, those things within a story that you just enjoy
Right.
writing or trying to figure out, and how to put it on the page. And hopefully, your goal is always hopefully to really have a book that the readers embrace and
Mm,
take it as their own. Because as a writer, I'm not writing for myself.
right.
I'm writing for people to read the book. So I want to make it accessible to readers as much as possible, and have them um, experience things. And that symbol I had hoped would help do that.
Absolutely, because the thing of it is that how can I put it? Even though she had her home and she had her family, it's like the family of her birth
Right.
that unfortunately she wasn't with, and then there was the family that she became a part of that embraces family, friends, and all of that, and then later on there's the family that she created
Yeah.
later on,
Yeah.
but just have a piece of of who she is,
Mm-hmm.
that's with her, that she can carry with her. So it's like it's a way of paying homage to those people, and a way for her to always remember that, kind of like to say, remember where you came from.
Exactly.
It's kind of that piece that all these wonderful things are happening around you, but there's that space that you came from. So that's
Right.
without giving away
And
what
you don't
that's
want to
what's
lose it.
important about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I like how you broke that down with the family, family, family.
Mm,
Mhm.
mhm.
Yeah, that's good.
Use that for your notes. I'm just messing
Right?
with you.
I'm scribbling. I'm scribbling. Absolutely.
Oh man. But there are a couple of questions that people ask
Okay.
about her. Like, do you know if Sarah have any living descendants from her
I
bloodline?
believe she does, and I will mention one woman, I don't remember her name, but I believe it was her great-granddaughter, was very instrumental in finding, patient 0 for AIDS, and she was a doctor,
Hmm.
and, was just part of the African team, and in Paris and all of that story. So yeah, she definitely had descendants.
Oh, that's good to know. Let me see. There was
Mhm.
another question. This is because, of course, there's several places that she visits throughout the story. So Margaret asked, "What would you say is the most resonant location for a reader to visit after reading this book?"
Well, I would want to go to Africa. I have not been to Africa. I've been
Mhm.
to London, I've been to Windsor Castle, I've been all through that part of, um, the UK, Stonehenge, what have you. But I have not been to Africa. I'd love to go to Lagos and/or Freetown
Mhm.
and/or all of it. I
Right.
know.
All
I'm going to go, not I want to go. I will.
Yes, you shall go. But
I
yeah,
shall be there.
that just makes me think, like you mentioned, her great granddaughter. I'm just wondering if, well, in your research, you may know, are there any spaces over there that may have some sort of a monument to her or anything like that that you're aware of?
Uh, Not necessarily.
Okay.
In Africa, I'm not gonna say, but there is a monument that exists in the world,
Okay.
but it's not in Africa.
Okay. Okay. Well, we can Google it and find out.
Yes,
Google is your
you can.
friend.
Yes, you can.
Yeah, so I just think that, of course, the timing of the story is because a lot of people are into Bridgerton and stuff like that.
Oh,
So they're
absolutely.
thinking about. So I'm sure that doesn't sound like that was intentional because you started working on this a while ago.
Oh, yeah, no, well, here's the thing, Bridgerton is complete fiction, okay?
Hmm.
It is, wonderfully complete fiction that is, romance, historical romance. Its
Hmm.
stories are all about couples and
Hmm.
how they get together, how they are driven apart and brought back together, and then the timing and the casting is brilliant of the TV series, and I mean the streamed series. But then Julia Quinn's books go back. I mean, Julia Quinn has been the author of the original stories, goes back many years. So that's a whole different um, genre, historical romance, from
Hmm.
biographical historical fiction. So even I think that the fascination or
Right,
what
that
you're
part.
yeah, what you're getting is a look at royalty. What are the other stories that come
Mhm,
out of not just the British monarchy, but also just royalty, be it stories like Queen of Exiles by Vanessa Riley. Um,
mhm,
you know, just who are those queens and
mhm,
princesses and kings of color, African, Haitian, what have you. So that is just a part of the fabric that
mhm.
just happened. Are we going
Right.
to see more queens and kings and what have you? I don't know. If the story's there and author jumps on it and is excited by it, and the editor and publisher gets a hold of it, sure, you're going to get
Mhm.
more because there are a
Right.
lot of stories to be told. I mean,
A lot of stories because you were talking about Vanessa's. I'm thinking about the other Vanessa, Vanessa Miller, has a
yes,
book coming out next year. I'm looking at it. It's The American Queen, which is about
uh-huh.
a kingdom that took place here, here in the
Mhm.
United States. So yeah, there are a lot of stories out there that we don't know about, we're not aware of. So,
And
or
just
like in
to
this
talk
case, you see
about.
a picture
Yeah.
and you might wonder, well, who is this person in this picture? So
Mhm.
we have another question from Laura. Let's see, it takes a second to pop up. What was the biggest roadblock you encountered while researching this story, if there were any?
There were, most definitely, and it mostly had to do with Captain Davies, because he is later in the story, he has a key role in the
Mm,
story. I'm not giving anything away,
okay.
but I had one book that I found, and there were some other stories, but it was just I wanted more. I wanted more facts about him, and I did not have access to as much as I wanted. I had access to a good amount. I wanted more. I just
Mhm.
wanted more. I was greedy. I got
Right.
greedy.
Nothing wrong with that because you never know how, even if you don't use it here, it could be used for something else.
Oh, definitely. I mean,
Right,
I got 3 or 4 story ideas out
right.
of
Right.
the research that I did on this book.
Right, right. And that just leads me to believe just or to wonder, just research in general. Now, of course, we know that, like there may be historical documents that you can find. Was it all, were you able to do it all virtually, or was there a time where you went
This
to
one
a library or something, or how
I
did you?
have I did go to the Library of Congress to the map room and did some extensive research on locations and maps from that time period.
Mhm,
Otherwise, I'm fortunate that as a professor, I have an online access to libraries all over the place, and that was a way of getting a lot of information where I didn't have to travel. And I was writing this book during the latter days of the pandemic too, so there wasn't a lot of opportunity to travel and
mhm.
and do interviews, if you will.
Right. Well, that's good. Well, we've got like 5 minutes left. So I, of course, want to continually encourage people to go ahead and grab a copy of The Other Princess. It is a wonderful read, or audio. I actually did the audio just because, sometimes time. I had a busy party weekend.
Yep, yep, I
I was
understand.
like, yeah, let me do the audio so I can make sure that I'm ready. So I definitely encourage you to pick up copies, at your favorite bookstores. Also, one of your favorite bookstores should be mine. And that's the sorry, my Brown Girl Collective Bookstore, which
Yeah,
is affiliated with Bookshop. If you shop at
yeah,
Bookshop, but
yeah.
if you just go to Brown Girl Collective Bookstore, you will see Denny's book listed there. Since we're having this conversation tonight, so that is an option if you are interested in purchasing online. But I also want to mention you've got something else that's juicy coming out next year. A couple things that are juicy coming out next year that we're going to be on the lookout for. And I believe pre-orders are available for already.
For both of them. The first book.
What's next?
What's next? March 5th, 2024. A book I co-authored with Eliza Knight is entitled Can't We Be Friends? A novel of Ella Fitzgerald and Marilyn Monroe. It is the story of their friendship, which was real life. And of course, it's fiction, but we did a lot of research, and the story is, I feel, riveting, new. You're going to get some insights into Marilyn Monroe you've never experienced. I don't care how much you read about her. And then Ella Fitzgerald was amazing to research because so much of it was me listening to all of her music. But also, she was a woman who was driven. She was driven to perform, driven to use her art, driven to be in love, driven to have a son. She was just amazing. So I'm very excited about that book coming March 5th. I just handed in another book called The Trial of Mrs. Rhinelander. Mrs. Rhinelander, this is another book based on facts. In 1925, a young, wealthy white man who had recently married the not so wealthy daughter of a taxi cab driver whom he'd been seeing for more than 3 years and had just married a couple of weeks before, goes to court and sues her for an annulment because she did not tell him that she was colored. Now, did she not tell him? Was she colored? Oh, there's just so much to this story that I dug up in my head. And there's transcripts available, news stories galore. It was, in Chicago, the big story in the 20s was Leopold and Loeb, which was the murder, the two young men who murdered a young boy, and they were wealthy young men, and they murdered a poor boy and thought they were going to get away with it. And then the other big case that was front page news was the Stokes monkey trial, which had to do with Darwin and blah, 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 and all that. This was the other big story nationwide. And it was amazing to research. I'm looking forward to getting it back from my editor with her comments, yay, so that we can make it as sharp as it possibly can be. I'm very excited about this story. It took me a while to get what that story was going to be, because it's not, I don't think it's not just a story about passing.
Okay.
It's much more layered than that.
Got it. Well, at least you've got a spot right here for both. You're always welcome.
That was out till July, end of July. It's an August title.
Yes. And I believe you said, okay.
Yeah, it's changed. It's July 23rd.
Oh, okay, for the second one, and the first one is in March.
It was referenced in her book, Nella Larson's book. I think that Nella's book came out in 25.
I'm not sure.
Yeah,
Nella Larson. And that's passing, for those who don't know.
It was definitely mentioned, but it's so complicated. It's just so complicated. I love complicated stories.
Yes, it makes for interesting reads where you're like, say, what, huh? And you got to go back and
Yeah.
Or like you listen again or turn back the page, you're like, did I read what that makes for
There's
a
a
great.
lot of that. You are not exaggerating.
Yeah, so that is good. So I am looking forward to those two titles as well. As I said, you already know you have an invitation to
Oh,
come here.
thank you.
So,
Thank you. I
please,
always love being here. That's
yeah, consistently firm up dates and all that stuff, and then we will go from there because I love talking to you. I love the work that you do, that you write and you write well and you bring stories to light that we might not be aware of otherwise. So I really can appreciate that. So I want to thank you for your time, Denny. It's been wonderful. And you can see the covers behind her. I'm going to throw the title back up for anybody who might have popped in here late and wonder what were we talking about. But the book for today is The Other
there it is. The
Princess.
other princess. Yeah.
Yeah, yes, about the life of Sarah Forbes Bonetta. So please go ahead and pick up a copy, read it, tell two friends, invite your book clubs to
Yes.
read it as well. And please follow Denny at all of the different places that are scrolling across the screen. So that way you can keep up with other events that she has going on, as well as, get first dibs on, what's happening with other projects that she has coming up. So
Yep.
thank you so much for your time. I'm going to let you off screen, but don't hang up just yet.
Okay.
I'm going to do the
Thank you
announcement.
for inviting me. I really enjoy being
Yes, absolutely. You know I love you, and we've met in person, so it's like
It happens, actually meeting people in person
yeah,
again.
meeting people in person. So that's
Yes.
an exciting thing. So
Mhm.
just hold on for me for one moment. I'm just going to announce next week's spectacular book, and then I'll let everybody go. So thanks again, Denny.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so next week, I'm really excited about next week's book as well as I was about Denny's book. This is one that I have actually been talking to this young lady since last year. I met her at an event, talk about meeting people in person. And this is One Blood by Deneen Milner. So I am really excited about having her come to talk to us next week about her multi-generational epic family novel. So be on the lookout for that. Grab a copy if you don't already have one, and get ready to come and join the conversation as I talk to Deneen next week. So that's all I've got for now, everybody. Thank you so much for watching and being engaged. As I stated, please share it out. Let others know about this book that we talked about tonight, The Other Princess, and some of the other things that we have coming up, because I'm always working to bring you wonderful Black women writers who tell stories that are by, for, and about us. So looking forward to seeing you again real soon. Take care. Bye-bye.